Welcome back to another video from the Sewing Works. My name is Corinne Douglas, and today we're going to talk about putting the scalloped borders on your Bloomin' Flowers quilt. So here I have my blocks that I've done on point, and I need to create a scallop border out of another fabric. So I have an 11-inch square, which I have already starched and cut at 11 inches. You want to starch before you cut. Some other things you will need before you get started is to cut out your template from your instructions. I also like to use a little bit of glue base to help hold it in place before I stitch it down. And you'll need a good pair of scissors to cut out your template. You're going to be cutting through 4 layers of fabric, so be sure and get a nice good sharp pair of scissors. So let's go over to my project table. Embroidered your block. Once you have embroidered your block, you're going to want to be sure and press it from the back side, and I like to use our flatter product to get all the puckers and the creases from the hoop out, make it nice and flat. Then we're going to set this one aside. Next, you're going to take your scallop piece, which has been cut to 11 inches, and you're going and starched prior to cutting. You're going to fold right sides together and press. And I'm just going to use a finger press technique. You may use the iron if you want, but you do want to get that pressed nice and flat. Then you're going to repeat that one more time. Lining up your edges, and pressing it nice and flat. So these 2 edges are folded, these 2 edges are raw. The next step is going to be to trim this to 5 1/4 inches. So I'm going to take my square ruler, figure out where 5 1/4 inches is. And I just want that 1/4 inch mark just on top of my fabric, not beside, but just barely on top. And then you're going to trim and trim. So once again, raw edges, folded edges. Then we're going to take our template, and you want to align it so that where it says fold, it's touching the fold. So fold to fold, fold to fold. Just like that. Then we're going to pin it in place and cut out your scallop. Now that we have our scallop cut out, we're ready to come back to our embroidered block. And we are going to just center this scallop border around our motif. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will be equal distance on the outsides of your block. We're checking more for the insides of your block. And if you need to get a ruler out for this to help you make sure it's nice and even, don't hesitate to do that. Once you have it in place where you like, this is when I recommend coming through with your glue base and just peeling this up, putting a few dots all the way around the interior of this block, and you might even choose to put a little bit down the exterior. The exterior I'm not as worried about. Once you get this sewn on, we're going to trim that outside off. So I'm not quite centered yet. Let's get here. that doesn't look terrible. Well, it's hard to say. Is the background off or is the basket off? Just do the best you can. I think I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and glue, and then I'm going to use the iron to set the glue, and then we'll jump over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to stitch this down. Now I've got my scallop border glued down, and I have my number 39C, my clear foot on, which is the one I like to use to blanket stitch and be able to see what I'm doing. I brought my blanket stitch up at a 2.5 width and a 2.5 length. I like to balance that out a little bit, and if you keep it fairly small, it's easier to hit your corners. So I also need to mirror image this to go the way I want to go. So I'm going to use that little red guide in the front to follow this edge around, and I have matching thread. Okay, maybe not right there. Let's try that again. So I'm keeping that red edge just right inside. And by gluing this down, it's not going to squirrel away from me. So I'll go ahead and buzz around this whole thing and show you what we got. Now that my blanket stitch is finished all the way around, I can come back in with my square up ruler, and I have my glow line tape set for my trim line. And I'm going to trim that down to 10 3/8 inch. Okay, so we finished our scalloped borders. I would definitely recommend that you trim up after you put your scallop border on. Otherwise, you might end up not hitting your corners exactly where you want. But they turned out pretty cute. Also, definitely recommend using the glue to help hold it in place. That wasn't in your directions, but everything else pretty much follows the directions as they were written, and they turn out just darling. So have fun, and we'll see what you come up with. Thanks.